said last time, we couldn't do it without you. So as Miriam stated, this is the second in a series of webinars that is hosted by a consortium of all of the economic organizations and representation from some of the area municipalities. You can go to southwestcoda.org, that's swcoda.org, for more information. We were really anxious to schedule this second webinar given the application dates that were announced, but information is still very fluid. We even got some more guidance coming in this morning around the PPP calculation, which I'm sure we'll hear about in a few minutes. The collective objective for all of us is to get as many businesses, sole proprietors, contractors, and not-for-profits through the PPP application process. And this will collectively help our community's economic recovery. So to do this, we'll have to leverage all of our resources and leverage whatever capacity exists with all of our financial institutions. Miriam, will you go to the next slide, please? With that said, we've sought input from many of the regional financial institutions or banks to give us an update on their status in terms of facilitating PPP applications and other SBA loans. We're not listing outlying areas, so this is probably an incomplete list. So make sure that you check with your banker, get the most up-to-date status, as it's probably changing on potentially on a daily basis. But either way, let them know of your intention to apply if you've not done so already, whether it's in this last round that opened up April 3rd or the next round that opens up April 10th. And we hope that this webinar assists you in addressing some of these questions. I know it sounds cliche by now, but we're still all in this together, and the only way we're going to get through this is collectively or together. So next slide, Miriam. We put together an agenda, and I'd like to thank all the speakers who, every single person on here is extremely busy, but they've taken the time to provide their expertise, so heartfelt gratitude to all of them. One of our best local consultative resources is the Small Business Development Center, and so I'd like to introduce their Executive Director, Mary Shepard. Mary?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
next slide,
excellent.
Mary.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mary Shepard, and I am the Director of the Southwest Colorado Small Business Development Center. For those of you who aren't already familiar with our program, we are one of 15 SBDC centers in the state of Colorado, and we are here to provide consulting to small businesses across the 5 counties and 2 tribes of Southwest Colorado. So right now we're working closely with businesses who have questions about some of these disaster relief programs, but we're also here to help business strategize on how they're going to kind of execute recovery. So feel free to outreach us with any questions that you may have. We are available, we're taking calls, we're setting up consultations. We have a whole team of consultants, and they are working through Zoom and Skype and other programs and can meet with you face-to-face to kind of work through the application process and really help you with anything that you need that's business related. So I'm not going to take a lot of time. Feel free to outreach us if you have any questions, but I do want to introduce, and I'm super happy to have both David Benavides and Bob Martin on the line from SBA, and I'm going to let them kind of talk about the SBA payment protection program that came out of CARES Act, and they'll also, I think, discuss a little bit the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program and how those two work together, especially how they interact with regards to the forgiveness of the PPP. If you have both programs, if you already have the EIDL, how you can roll that into your PPP. So if everyone's okay with it, the other panelists, I'm going to go ahead and let David and Bob go ahead and start answering questions or giving the overview.
Thank you, Mary. I will. I'm going to do a brief overview of the economic injury disaster loan, and then I will do a quick overview of the payment protection, because I know there's probably a lot more questions out there than that want to get answered. So On the economic injury disaster loan, that is a loan that is done through our disaster center. So to apply for that loan, you actually have to go to the www.sba.gov site. That loan is actually a loan that can go up to $2 million. The rates on it are 3.75 for businesses, and the payments are automatically deferred out 12 months, and the loan itself is set out over 30 years. The unique thing to this is, as you apply for the loan, you can select to do what we call an EIDL advance. It's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance. If you request the advance and answer the questions, and it looks like you're going to be okay with the loan, all that, they will actually advance you a portion of what you're going to be approved for the loan. Now, the amount, I'll go back, the amount of the loan that you get, I said it can go up to $2 million, but the actual amount of the loan that you can actually get, you have to actually be able to show the economic impact. That's the amount that you will be approved for, not actually $2 million. Now, the advance can be up to $10,000, but that's up to $10,000. But the advance is actually a portion of the amount that the underwriter thinks you're going to be approved for. Now, if you get the advance and you take the advance, that advance is actually forgiven. It's a forgiven loan, the advance part. Now, the rest of the EIDL loan is actually a true loan, so that'll be expected that it gets paid back. The other one that we got is our Paycheck Protection Program. Now, that program is actually done through our financial institutions, which means you will go to your bank, your local bank, or any bank that's an SBA lender, and you can apply for this. That one can go up to actually $10 million, but the amount that you will be approved for is 2.5 times your average payroll. And your payroll can include benefits and retirement funds. That again is deferred out 6 months. And the unique thing about that program is if you use the funds for what it's intended for, hiring your staff back on, and you use at least 75% of it for payroll, then that loan will be forgiven as well. So those are the things that we have going right now. Again, the paycheck protection has to be done through a financial institution, and the economic injury is done through our website. That is, I know, a quick, brief overview, but I know there are a lot of questions out there, and I want to be able to get to those. So I'm going to leave my stuff. I'm going to leave my stuff at that.
John, real quick, I know that there were some updates this morning around PPP calculations. Can you go into sort of what maybe changed today?
Well, it changes every day. So I hate to sit here and try to go through and say, well, this is where we're at. The calculations itself, again, the amount of the loans you can get is 2.5 times what your payroll is. And again, payroll includes benefits, retirement, and all that. But the best part about it is if you use the loan for what it's intended for, hiring your staff back on, and actually making payroll with it, then the loan is a forgiven loan.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be other questions that we'll get to in the Q&A.
Yep.
Mary, you have any additional comments at all?
No. Do we want to go ahead and bring some of the questions in the Q&A while we have David kind of talking about these programs? It looks like there was one participant who has quite a few questions about how they calculate self-employed payroll. Do we want to do that now, or do we want to wait till the end?
John, are you going to be with us through the entirety of the webinar, or do you want to address some of the questions now?
I will be here through the duration. I also have Bob Martin that's on the line with me as well. So between the two of us, we can answer the questions. And just to catch Mary's real quick, that's the biggest one. We've been asked, what about 1099 employees? Those employees are eligible to apply for the PPP on their own. So they don't have to go to the contracted employer. They can just go to a financial institution and apply for the PPP on their own.
Okay, thank you. With that said, I think, Mary, we'll catch all these questions in just a little bit. John, I think you are next. John Whitney from Senator Bennett's office.
Mike, can you hear me okay? I think I'm
I can.
unmuted
Thank
now.
you.
Great. Sounds good. So thanks for having me, Mike. I know that there is a lot of concern in the business community about, PPP issues. Obviously, we're trying to get up and running a big new program that is going to take some time to work out the kinks. But one of the more existential concerns, of course, is will there be enough funding? And I know that's particularly worrisome for those who can't apply until the 10th of this month versus people who applied on the 3rd. So just wanted to give a quick update on where things stand in Washington, D.C. on this. Congressional leaders in the White House are now starting to really ramp up the conversation about the need for a new legislative package to continue to address the economic devastation we're seeing here from the coronavirus. House Democrats yesterday announced that they're looking at spending increases that could easily go over $1 trillion. Specifically, Speaker Pelosi said yesterday that she's looking to extend the unemployment aid as well as the small business provisions that we're talking about here today, including PPP. She also wants to authorize another round of direct checks and payments to taxpayers. Meanwhile, President Trump yesterday also signaled some support for some of the same ideas, including the small business assistance and, again, direct checks to taxpayers and households. So it seems, there's strong bipartisan support for additional funding for some of these programs, including PPP. So it's likely, Congress will approve more funding. The question becomes when. This morning, news broke that the Senate could vote as early as Thursday to approve approximately $250 billion of new funding for the PPP program. Small Business Committee Chairman Rubio has estimated that it needs between $2 and $250 billion. And so there's talk of getting this vote scheduled as soon as Thursday. Now, the problem here becomes that we do not have, the Senate is not in session. The Senate is adjourned. Senators are scattered across the country. So it'll be a little challenging. They'll have to do it with a parliamentary procedure where it's unanimous consent, and every single senator there will have to agree. So any one senator could block it. So we don't know for sure that it'll go through, but hopefully it can get through the Senate on Thursday and be on its way over to the House and get going sooner rather than later. So again, no guarantees there, but it seems like bipartisan consensus in Congress that PPP needs more funding and hopefully will happen before too long. A couple other comments about the larger bill that's coming together and being talked about right now. It would also hopefully include more money for local and state government funding. There's a lot of folks on the House side talking about an additional $250 billion there. The first bill, the CARES Act, had $150 billion, but that is really not nearly enough for what local governments are going to need facing their revenue shortfalls that they're seeing right now. Also, looking at the schedule on the larger bill, if this expedited effort doesn't come together, there is a possibility the full Senate might convene the week of April 20th, and the House is scheduled to be in that week as well for potential votes. So if we don't get the expedited one done, we might be able to get it done that week. A couple other things about that next bill that Senator Bennett is advocating for. One, additional funding, which we already talked about, but also, he's hearing and we're hearing from a lot of folks around the state that it might be beneficial to relax some of the affiliation rules that are happening right now. Some small businesses and startups across Colorado get some degree of venture capital funding. And because those venture capital folks invest in several small businesses, the SBA rules may prohibit those businesses from accessing the PPP. So we're looking at legislation or language in the next bill that would relax those rules so that venture-backed businesses can also obtain access to the PPP. There's also talk about changing some of the loan terms on the PPP. In the last legislation, the CARES Act, Congress gave up to 10 years for the length of the loans, but the SBA and their guidance went with 2. And we are hearing from other folks that believe that 2 years is insufficient to allow people to pay down their PPP loan should it not become a grant. For most people, hopefully it will become a grant and be forgiven. But if there are folks that slip into the category of having to repay, Senator Bennett is looking to try and get a term of 5 to 7 years for full payback. with payments delayed until well after this whole crisis has ended. The other thing that we're talking about for the next bill is the current Treasury Department rules note that only 25% of the loan forgiveness may be attributable to non-payroll costs. And we're looking at revisiting that to see if that limit can be lifted. A couple other things for the bill that Senator Bennett is advocating for is to increase, again, the direct payments. His original plan was $2,000 in direct payments for every American. He's going to continue to advocate for that. Regarding some of the implementation issues with SBA, we've been in touch regularly with them in their Denver and DC office, trying to see what we can do to fix some of the technical hurdles that we've been seeing. Senator Bennett is also going to do a call with the head of the SBA out of DC to express some of the concerns we're hearing on the ground and see what we can do to iron some of those kinks out. One thing in particular we're hearing about is from some of the business folks is that there's just not enough access to lenders. Some small businesses are getting turned away because they don't have a loan or a DDA account with a bank. And we're trying to encourage SBA to think about broadening who can be eligible for the PPP program. And just encouraging them also to keep growing their list of lenders that might be able to help handle the significant volume that's coming in. And then one other thing I just wanted to address briefly is I know we've talked before, some of us on this call, about how 501c6s were excluded from the last bill. That is something that will be revisited for the next bill. It's hard to say where that will go, if there will be a consensus in Congress to make 501c6s eligible for the PPP program. It was discussed for the last bill. It didn't come in the last bill, but for those who are interested in that, they should think about doing some advocacy and work with both our office and others, because if I was scoring it, I would say it's going to be kind of a tough thing to get in the next bill. I know that the U.S. Chamber didn't actually push for it in the last bill, so it hasn't had solid support across the country, but certainly something that we're looking at and hearing from people on. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. And John, are you going to be able to hang out to answer some questions as well?
Yeah, I will be.
For a little bit? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I think next on the docket is Kent Curtis. Kent, are you there?
You hear me now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon.
Thanks for being here, Kent.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. Paycheck Protection Plan, the PPP, certainly in full swing from the banker's standpoint. Getting hundreds of applications. I'm glad to hear John mention that they're looking to appropriate some additional funds, because that seems to be a bit of a panic from the small business owners that we've been talking to. So good work there, John, and hopefully Senator Bennett can be part of that and make that happen. Couple quick points, and I've kind of heard some of this mentioned already, but any bank signed up with the SBA is allowed to participate as a PPP lender. We'd advise you that, check with your bank to see if they are a lender participating in the program. Some lenders have chosen not to. Mike had a really good list there of the local institutions and what they're doing, so that's good. You do not need to specifically use your bank. Others can also process your PPP application too, by the way. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but the program application deadline right now is set for June 30th. But like John said, the rules are changing every night. We end up putting those into our program pretty much at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. So right now, though, I think the deadline is June 30th. We definitely encourage all small business owners to consider applying. You need to do this. So, and that's basically all I really had, Mike. I was just going to mention.
Okay, Kent. Appreciate it. And if you can stick around and answer some questions as well from a lender's perspective, that would be great. For all the panelists, you're seeing the Q&A. You just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom. you can actually type in answers and we'll assimilate those. So feel free to grab those. Mr. Malone, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Mike.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here.
Great. So thanks, Mike, Miriam, everyone out there. Appreciate it. My goal here is just kind of give an overview of the kind of questions we're getting, the considerations you might have as an employer as you look at the options that are all out there. So with that overview, I'm sure there'll be some more questions, but hopefully this can be of some guidance. For those who have laid off your employees, put your employees on furlough. Unemployment still is a great option. So we continue to advocate having your employees go on unemployment if indeed there is no work available right now. As you've probably heard, the feds have added about $600 a week to be administered and distributed to each state. We don't have a lot of details as to when that the states will have those funds in addition to, and this is in addition to normal state supplied unemployment. We do know it'll be retroactive to the date of eligibility, but the $600 question as to when people will see those checks still isn't clear. But unemployment in a lot of cases is still a viable answer right now. Another program going on, as folks have heard about, is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA. And what that's doing is it's allowing paid sick leave with some guidelines. It's not just paid sick leave because you're out of work. There are very specific items that are needed. One has to be subject to quarantine or directed into quarantine, in the process of obtaining a test or seeking diagnosis, or caring for a child. And what that does, it allows for payment by the employer to the employee if those are met. The Q&A and the fact sheets listed right here that you'll see in this slide will give you ideas if that's an idea is good for your employers or good for your employees. One stipulation there, it's really for time taken beginning last Wednesday the 1st. So there's a very specified time as to when you can get that and pay that paid sick leave out as part of your payroll. And how that shows up, it's essentially you get a credit right away on your 941, your federal tax liability for that given payroll. That credit comes right away. So that's not money out of your pocket. That's reduced from overall payroll liability for those employees who qualify. But you want to read the fine print there. One consideration with unemployment and Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA, and this will tie into the CARES Act a little bit, is you can't double dip. You can't have an employee on unemployment and then paying them through payroll through FFCRA. So you want to be really careful of what program you're using or what mechanism you're using to keep employees paid while we're going through this time. And then the CARES Act, which we'll have more Q&A on, you've heard about. There's really three kind of payroll-related provisions of note. The Paycheck Protection Program, probably the biggest one, the one that's going to really provide the most assistance to folks in keeping your payroll running once you receive those funds. There's also an employee retention credit, which provides a 50% tax credit up to $10,000 for eligible compensation for employees. And there's also a third provision you'll hear about around a deferral of the employee portion of Social Security. So those three really, you'd only really want to look at the last two if for some reason the Paycheck Protection Program isn't a good answer for you. We've gotten a lot of questions regarding, well, what if I have people on FFCRA and I get CARES Act funding? And you can apply for both of those. You just can't use those funds that you've paid as qualified FFCRA paid sick leave as part of the forgiveness in the loan for payroll expense. So that's just another careful thing to keep an eye on. So, really looking at, talk to your CPA, your financial advisor about, which program is best given your situation, because it's a little bit different for everyone in terms of, are you still a, essential business so you can operate, or are your doors closed? And the best thing to do is, have your employees on unemployment until perhaps PPP funds come in. So a lot of moving parts there. We're just working really hard with, we have about 830 clients here in the Four Corners region and Durango, most of those in Durango, just working on getting everybody the data they need to get their applications in. So, again, work with your local banker, get a list. We are finding each bank has kind of slightly different specifications on what they want. It's generally the same data, but we're working on getting you, our clients, is the exact data they need as the bank specifies. So, start with your banker, and then if you are applying for PPP, get those specifications into us, and we're turning, we're working weekends and working evenings to turn around that data so you can get your applications moving through. Yeah, that's all. That's really all I had. I'm sure there's some Q&A that might relate to payroll or other items, but and I think that just well, Mike just put that other screen out, and I will highlight that too. Thanks, Mike. Just HR questions in general. We've got some great resources out there that a lot of our clients use, and this website that here, and I know the slide deck will be shared, has a great just how to deal with employees working from home. What if I, what kind of documentation do I need if I am laying off or furloughing employees? A lot of great resources, and it's updated all the time. So that link's going to be a good one for you employers who don't have an HR person or an HR department, yet you are that. This is a good resource. So please take a look.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate that. Miriam, can you go to the next slide? I just wanted to point out that there is also a playbook that has some of this data collected. It's on southwestcoda.org. If you click under La Plata and Business Resources, you can get to that playbook. Also wanted to make mention of the SURF Fund. There's a way to donate to the SURF via southwestcoda.org as well. We've got ample time. Thank you for being so succinct, everybody. But there are tons of questions. I've just noted a couple that seem to be on repeat, and would like to ask anybody to respond to this, maybe yourself, John. For small LLCs, even S-Corps that have only a couple of owners, no payroll, are they eligible for PPP? Same question is if you have a small company that 1099s everybody with no FTEs, are you eligible for PPP?
Okay, so for the last one, the one that has the 1099 employees, the 1099 employees will need to go out and apply for the PPP for themselves, because basically they are independent contractors. Now, for the other one, if the owners are paying themselves in their W-2 paychecks, then they can apply for the PPP. If they're paying themselves withdrawals, dividends, then that is not covered.
Okay, so requires W-2.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to look at it.
Okay, thank you. Another question is a time frame. Some companies don't believe that they'll open anytime soon, or may have challenges opening full time, and may not be able to get to the 75% threshold by June 30th. Can they reuse those funds or allocate those funds to other expenses, or are those funds not eligible anymore? And does that disqualify them for the grant?
Okay, so the funds can be used for payroll, utilities, rent, lease, those different items. But the forgiveness side of it comes in if they need to use at least 75% of the proceeds for payroll. Now, I have had the conversations, and we have had the conversations with a lot of companies that say they can't be in operation. I will use bars and restaurants for the example. They say that they're not eligible to open until the stay-at-home thing is finished. But the idea of the program is to rehire employees. The idea behind that as well is, are there other things that they can do within your business now that you can pay them for, like restaurants, bars? Do you need to sanitize your entire place because of what we're going through right now? Are there other things that they could do and get paid? The idea is to rehire and bring them on board. We know that these type of businesses are not going to be fully operational, but are there other things that they can do that you can bring them and provide payroll, considering the fact that this could be a completely forgiven loan if that's what you're using it for.
Thank you, John. Just a clarification on 1099. Can you use 1099 to calculate your employment?
For the business side on the application, the 1099 is actually used in there for the calculation side of it, but the 1099 employee needs to apply for the PPP on their own.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you. On the average, for the average monthly, is it employee and just employees and the payroll, or does that include the employer as well? So is it combined or just employees?
It's overall payroll. So if you're an owner and you're paying yourself as a W-2 employee, it's overall payroll, last 12 months.
Thank you. Another question was on the emergency, on the EIDL, is there a limitation? It looked like they were having problems getting over 1 mil. Is there a limitation there? What's the ceiling?
The ceiling on the loan itself is $2 million, but that again is based on what you can show was your economic impact. So if your sales figures for the last 2 years are calculated and you show that your economic impact has been $250,000, then yes, you're not going to get close to that 2 mil.
Okay, thank you. Eric, can either yourself or John, or maybe you, Mary, talk about hiring staff back and what the time frame for that is in terms of the PPP? You have an employer, they've had to either furlough or lay people off. What's the time frame of or requirements in terms of hiring them back?
I can, while still trying to interpret the rules, as we understand it, once you receive the funds, that for the next 8 weeks, that's what that payroll protection program is for, is to pay the employees for 8 weeks after receipt of the funds, in which case that's when you can hire them back. And John, you might have some details there, but that's what we understand is once you've got those funds, then they could come back and be employees again, and that's the idea, is getting them back on payroll. And that's our interpretation of it at this time.
And that's absolutely correct. The idea of the program is to, if you laid people off, is to rehire them and bring them back on board, or to continue to pay your current payroll.
Okay. Thank you. Another question is, when you receive the funds, the PPP funds, when do you start the 75%? Can you go in arrears to pay unemployment starting a specific date, or is it the day that you get the monies? And if so, when can the monies be expected?
It's when the funds are distributed, then you go out the 8-10 weeks for the payroll. Now the fund disbursement, that is all based on the approval through the financial institution. Once the approval is given and they get the response from SBA saying it's approved, then there is a expectation that the banks disperse the loans within 5 days of that.
There's a good question around payroll tax credits and the PPP loan. Can anybody take that on in terms of how that's used to calculate PPP? Payroll tax?
Yeah, and what just in terms of the applications we're seeing, and again, each bank has given us, slightly different specs, but generally to calculate that average cost of payroll, you're taking your total gross payroll, kind of that would tie to your 941 or what shows up in box 1 on W-2s for everybody, no matter what type of pay, bonuses, commissions, salary, hourly. You're taking that number, you're taking the health insurance benefits you pay on behalf of the employees, and any retirement match you pay, you take that number for the year, divide by 12, and that's the number that you use for that calculation of average monthly payroll cost. The tax credit, there are credits, the employee retention credit, we still don't have a lot of information on how that shows up or what goes on. You know, the IRS hasn't directed us how to calculate that, how it's going to show up on tax returns. So not as much information for me anyways, unless some of the other panelists have more info.
Thank you. Is the $10,000 grant on the emergency loan that is forgiven taxable income, knowing that the PPP loan proceeds is non-taxable income?
That I don't have an answer for. We have not heard how that's going to be handled.
Okay. How does PPP work with real estate agents that are self-employed? Are those that are owners / employees of a corporation and they take draws? Are they eligible for PPP?
If they're taking draws, div draws, or just regular draws, that does not count as income. That's investment. So that is not a PPP authorization.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, John, can I get clarity on that one? Because it says in the literature that you can use net income for a small business. So for a single member LLC, they're not going to pay themselves a W-2 payroll. They're not allowed to. So how do they calculate their income? I thought there was a calculation based on net income.
If they're classifying it as a dividend, then that is not eligible. So I don't know how they're classifying their payment to themselves.
Will there be a separate form for independent contractors and sole proprietors? In other words, in the April 10th wave, is the documentation still the same as April 3rd, or does it change?
As of right now, it's still the same form through the financial institution, but like we all know, this last couple of days, the whole process can change tomorrow. And considering the fact that that's a whole different category, we're going to have to wait and see.
Thank you. Just reading through these, bear with me.
There's one question I think it might actually be useful for others. Is it more about the dollar amount or more about the head count for the employer when using the PPP? So say they hire less people back, but with more hours versus the same number of people working less hours, or the previous same number of people working less hours.
The forgiveness is tied to the amount of employees they had prior to and at the end of the 8-10 weeks. So if you had 15 employees and you only bring 6-7 of them back, then that does affect the forgiveness amount.
Another question was, how do you check on status of the application for either PPP or as well as the emergency loan?
The PPP, the status to check on that would be going to your financial institution that you applied through. Now for the EIDL and the EIDL Advance, that would be contacting the Disaster Loan Center.
Okay. Miriam, Mary, do you guys see any other questions that that are not sort of repetitive or that we haven't answered? I know there's tons of them. I'm just having to go back to the start.
Actually, this
I'm kind of going through them. Go ahead, Miriam.
If we receive money through the PPP to support payroll, but have employees who are quarantine, isolation, or sick with COVID, are we expected to separate sick time sick leave payment for those employees, or is that funded by the PPP?
I believe, and John, please verify those. That would be double dipping. You're getting a credit when you pay those employees under sick leave right away in payroll on your 941 payment. So you'd want to separate that out for sure, as we understand it.
Does payroll include workman's comp?
From the applications we've seen come in from different banks, workers' comp is not included as in your average cost of monthly payroll.
Okay, thank you. Can a self-employed person apply for both unemployment as well as PPP?
Yeah, that's again is the double dipping side of things. You can't get both. Either you apply for the PPP and pay yourself, or you take the unemployment.
Thank you.
What about if a restaurant or a business wants to rehire furloughed employees for the 8 weeks PPP loan forgiveness? Are those employees' future unemployment benefits at risk because of that?
That one I don't have the answer to. I just know that the program is there to hire back, and even though the 8 week is forgiveness, you got to remember it's a 10 week that we're looking at.
And just as a note, I'm going to copy all of these and put them into a document so they can be answered and then posted to the website. So
thank you, Miriam. John, when might we know if there be a new application for independents and self-employed? Should they start working on the existing application or hold off? Because I think it's Friday, correct?
It's the 10th, yes. And I would start gathering the information, but I'm not sure if it's going to be the same application or not.
Okay.
I see a question here asking if somebody doesn't want to come back to work, can you hire somebody else so that you maintain your FTEs?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a matter of maintaining that level. So whether it's the prior employees or new employees, as long as the level is maintained.
John, just for clarification, an independent contractor that has an LLC and filed taxes as an S corp, they are eligible for a PPP. Is that correct or not?
From my understanding is yes, because it's payroll. So.
Okay.
So there's a question in here. If you do hire your staff back and you're paying them with PPP, are they required to be working, or can you pay them to sit at home?
If you hire them back, what they do, I guess, as an employer is up to you. Although the intent is to bring them back to work. There's got to be things that they could do through the business. To just bring them back and pay them so they could stay home, it's kind of defeating the whole purpose of this thing. The plan is to actually get you ready to reopen once you can. Can you do that if you're just paying them to be at home?
I would think in some cases, like restaurants, just having them waiting for when you are able to go back to work is helpful, because I've heard from restaurant owners that they are worried about their employees going away, and when it's time to reopen, they won't be there. So I think it would be helpful in some cases. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing as well, but I go back to the like restaurants and bars. Aren't there things around the restaurant and bar that they could be doing for you, whether it's cleaning, sanitizing, restocking, getting things ready. That I would think there are things within the establishment that could be done as you are paying these employees.
How about organizations or individuals that are paid on commission? How does that calculate into PPP?
Is our banker still on here? Because he'd probably have a better idea on how that application goes on that.
Kent, are you still in the ether?
Yeah, yes. Can you repeat the question? I was trying to answer something.
Yeah, the question was, how about organizations that are commission-based or individuals that are paid on commission? How does that get factored into the PPP calculation?
I don't know either. I mean, I can certainly find out if that question shows up in the queue there. I can take that and ask Sherry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there is some direction around that. I don't know offhand, this is Eric. There is some direction on how to get an average, regular pay amount somewhere in the fine print. It's there. You're just not sure exactly what it is.
Is it taking maybe all 12 months and commissions paid in those 12 months, dividing it by 12 is the monthly average?
Yeah, to that effect. It looks at how much commissions over time. I'm not sure if it's a year, month, or a week. There is a specification though.
Got it. Okay. Okay, Miriam, Mary, are you guys seeing anything else?
No, the only question I have is what's Mary's bird's name?
Oh, the bird. I'm sorry, I didn't even see the bird. Yeah.
Sorry, and I apologize. This is working from home, so I put him upstairs at the beginning of this, and I guess I forgot to close the door, and he flew back down. Well, he goes by Bird pretty much, but his official name is Willow.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Speaking of Little Bird, Sherry happens to be listening in. She just sent me a text that commissions are a level wage, and you have to take an average of the 12 months prior. So.
Got it. Thank you so much. There was a question around double dipping. It appears that I'm going to read this verbatim. It appears that double dipping is only prohibited in the same time frame. For example, if an employer can furlough employees until their PPP loan funds, then pay employees for 8 weeks and then lay off or furlough them after the 8 weeks, the double dipping would not occur if it's in the same, since it's not in the same time frame and they don't overlap. Is that correct?
I think he's got it correct. Yeah, that's you can't have those time frames overlap. And I think the other question that was up is, okay, well, you've exhausted your PPP funds. Do you put everyone back on unemployment? I mean, that's the question we keep getting. It's not super clear. I would think so, but the overlapping is a good way to look at it for sure. And then around FFCRA, you just going to need to back out those wages that were paid for your forgiveness, because you've already gotten the credit for that. That's another nuance, just specific to FFCRA.
Okay. There was a question here around what form do you use as a landlord who has lost rents due to the virus?
Well, the programs themselves aren't there for investment properties and that. So what I've been telling people is, like, if you're a commercial property owner or you own apartments and that type of thing, I would encourage your tenants to go out and look at the resources so that they can get either the PPP or the EIDL loan, so that then they can fulfill their obligations. But the programs aren't there for investment properties.
Thank you.
There's a question in here about seasonal employers. So if you're looking at an employer that maybe doesn't carry any employees, like over the winter months, but right now they would be gearing up to hire their employees to start their summer season, what's the calculation for them on employment?
Can we bring Kent back on that one? Because I don't know how financial institutions are calculating that at this point.
Let me see if my little birdie answers again real quick.
Mary, can you repeat that question real quick, just so we capture that?
Yeah, we're just getting a question about, so let's, for example, say raft companies, right? They might not have any employees over the last 6 months, and maybe they only employ people for 6 months, but they're getting ready to hire the people they would need for this season. What does their calculation look for, as far as employment? So if you average it over 12 months, it's going to look like less than they would actually have during their key months. So have they adjusted how they're doing those calculations for seasonal companies?
Okay. Kent, we'll put that on hold real quick. One other question. I think this might have been addressed already, but if we receive money through the PPP to support our payroll, and then we have employees who end up quarantined or isolation, or in isolation, are we expected to separate out sick leave payment for those employees from the payroll funded by PPP?
Yeah, so depending upon what software you're using to calculate your payrolls, and all the payroll software companies are scrambling to write the rules so this shows up right on tax returns and payroll tax returns. But generally, yes, you would need to separate out FFCRA, and that's those are specified, subject to quarantine, referred by medical professional to quarantine. You would want to separate those out because they are essentially credited right away, unlike your normal payroll process that you'd be running and calculating your tax liability from. So it's important to keep those separate.
Thank you. Will sole proprietors who report on a Schedule E be allowed to benefit from PPP?
That I'd have to look at. Off the top of my head, I don't have an answer to.
Okay. Thank you.
Again, hey, Mike, that might be a question that I could get an answer to fairly quick. If I can get some of these sent to me or look through them here, I can get some of these answered pretty quick.
So one other question here is February 15th. Is that the date which businesses use to work back from for the 12 months prior time frame for calculating payroll expense?
It is that February date. Is it the 15th? I don't know off the top of my head, but it is that February date when all this went into place.
Okay.
There's been some questions about the PPP and nonprofits. Can anybody sort of address that, and how would they apply since there's no ownership or anything like that?
They are eligible. So yes, they can apply if that's the question.
There's a question here on how do you handle employees who make more than $100,000 a year?
Actually, I think, and Eric probably knows this, the calculation is only goes up to the 100,000. I don't think it goes, you can't account for more than that.
Yeah, so when we when we provide the bank with your payroll reports, for example, we any earners over 100, we just report up to 100. So anything above that just doesn't get reported to be used in that average payroll month calculation.
I assume that also is true of when you're calculating forgiveness as well.
Correct. It would show up at the other end as well in terms of what you're getting.
Eric, you might be able to answer this. For part-time employees who are not normally eligible for sick time or PTO, but then get sick, does the employer need to pay sick time under the FCCRA?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So a company that offers sick or PTO time, that's just a benefit. No company is required to do that. No business is required to offer that. What the FFCRA allows for is if you have employees who become sick, you can give them paid sick leave, even though perhaps your business never had paid sick leave as a benefit. This provides for that. And essentially with part-time employees, it is prorated to an average of their hours per week. So they are eligible, they can get the credit, but those part-time employees would only get an average of their weekly part-time hours.
Eric, one other question. If somebody uses a professional employment organization, a PEO, and they file an aggregate 941 for all their clients, and they can't provide a copy of the 941, does that hurt the ability for the application process, and what's the alternative?
Yeah, that is a great question. I haven't had the PEO question come up because really those employees are employees of the PEO, of the professional employment organization. So that would be I'd ask their PEO, how do I back out my part of this in a PEO situation?
So go back to the PEO.
Yeah, and say, hey, how do I do it? And I'm sure the PEOs, I would hope at this point have an answer for that.
Okay. Okay. As Miriam said, we're going to do our best to capture all of this. There are probably close to 150 questions, and so some of these have been answered, some of them have not, but we'll do our best to capture these. We'll produce a PDF and put it on southwestcoda.org, and I'd like to again thank our panelists for being here today. Thank you so very much. And thank you for all of my peers that host this. I'm really grateful for all of you. I'm humbled to be working with all of you guys. So thank you again. With that, this concludes our webinar, and we'll let everybody know when we have more information and a need for the next webinar. Thank you.